A golden bracelet on a wrist. A hand embracing a child. Two bodies frozen in volcanic ash for 1,500 years. Since 1974, the whole world has known this story by heart. A mother holds her child close in the last seconds of life. The House of the Golden Bracelet, ancient Pompeii. The most poignant image of ancient disaster. It has been printed in textbooks, shown in films, and sung about in novels. The perfect symbol of motherly love conquering death itself. Millions of people have stood in silence before this cast. And then came DNA. In 2024, Harvard, the Max Planck Institute, and the University of Florence extracted ancient genetic code from the plaster casts of Pompeii. The results shattered the beautiful legend in one blow. The mother turned out to be genetically male. The child was not related to him in any way. Everything we so confidently knew about Pompeii crumbled to ash between our fingers. But this is just the beginning. Because the mother and child is far from the only lie that Pompeii told us. The famous two maidens in an embrace, a symbol of sisterly love, reproduced on postcards and in films, also turned out to be something entirely different than what they were considered for a whole century. The plaster casts that we took for accurate replicas of real bodies were secretly altered by restorers. And the genetic code of the Pompeians told a story that no one expected to hear. These people were genetically closer to the populations of the Middle East than to modern Italians. How is this possible? Who were the inhabitants of the great Roman Empire? What secret does their DNA hold? And what does this secret tell us about ourselves? In the next 20 minutes, we will unravel the genetic code of Pompeii, molecule by molecule. And what we will see will change everything. To understand who the inhabitants of Pompeii were, we must rewind time far back. 10,000 years. The Mesolithic era. The Apennine Peninsula still knows neither wheat nor the potter's wheel nor ships. Small groups of hunter-gatherers roam the hills of future Italy. Dozens, perhaps hundreds in each group. They hunt deer, gather roots and mollusks, shelter in caves from winter winds. Genetically, these people are typical of Western Europe at that time. Their world is simple and closed. They are born, live, and die within a radius of several dozen kilometers. Their DNA changes little from generation to generation because there are simply no outsiders. A large study from Stanford University in 2019, encompassing 127 ancient genomes and 12,000 years of Italian history, confirmed this picture. The genetic landscape of the Mesolithic is uniform and calm. But this is the calm before the storm, because a wave is already moving in from the east that will rewrite everything. About 8,000 years ago, the quiet genetic world of Italy split in two. A powerful wave of migrants surged from present-day Turkey and Iran. These were not warriors or conquerors. They were farmers, people who had learned for the first time in history how to tame the land. They brought with them seeds of wheat and barley, herds of domesticated goats and sheep, and, most importantly, a completely different genetic code. Anatolian DNA invaded the European genome like a river flowing into a lake. The hunter-gatherers did not vanish instantly, but their genetic footprint began to dissolve rapidly. New haplogroups born on the plains of the Fertile Crescent gradually replaced the old markers. That same Stanford analysis showed this with remarkable clarity. In just a few generations, Italy became genetically a different country. This was the first great rewrite. The first time migration completely changed the biology of an entire peninsula, but far from the last. Millennia passed. Farmers settled down, built the first villages, fired the first ceramics. But about 5,000 years ago, the genetic map of Italy shook once again. This time, the wave came from the north. From the vast Pontic-Caspian steppes, from the territory of modern Ukraine and southern Russia, tribes of Bronze Age herders moved in. They brought with them horses, wheeled carts, bronze weapons, and a new powerful genetic component that scientists call step DNA. This third layer lay over the hunter-gatherer and agricultural layers, creating a complex genetic cocktail. 3 streams, 3 epochs, 3 worlds, mixed in one cauldron. And here's what's astonishing. By the time of the founding of Rome, in 753 BC, the genetic portrait of the inhabitants of Italy already resembled modern Mediterranean populations. The foundation had been laid. The triple helix of hunters, farmers, and steppe dwellers seemed complete, but the real genetic revolution was still ahead. Before we peek into the genetic code of the Pompeians, we need to answer the main question. How could DNA have survived in hell? The temperature of the pyroclastic flows that struck Pompeii in 79 AD reached 300 degrees Celsius. At such heat, cremated bodies do not preserve a single fragment of genetic code. Scientists were convinced that Pompeii was a dead zone for paleogenetics. But nature created a paradox. The victims did not come into direct contact with the lava. Volcanic ash, 4 to 6 meters thick, instantly engulfed their bodies and sealed them in an anoxic capsule. And it is precisely oxygen and water that are the main destroyers of DNA molecules. Temperature merely accelerates decay, but without oxygen, the process comes to a halt. Geneticist Gabriele Scorano from the University of Copenhagen admitted that no one expected success. The ash that killed these people simultaneously preserved their most precious secret, the genetic code. Now let's travel to 1863. Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli made a brilliant discovery. He noticed that the bodies of the deceased, having decomposed inside the solidified ash, left behind hollow voids. Fiorelli poured liquid gypsum into these voids and obtained exact casts of people at the moment of death. The world was shaken. Over 1.5 centuries, 104 casts were made. The frozen figures of mothers, children, lovers, and slaves became the most recognizable images of the ancient world. But in 2015, a group of scientists conducted a CT scan and X-ray of 26 casts. The results were staggering. Not a single cast contained a complete skeleton. Bones were often removed before the gypsum pouring. Metal rods were inserted for stability. And the poses of the bodies were likely creatively restored, according to the researchers' conclusion. The casts we had taken for granted were partly works of art, bearing the aesthetics of their creation era rather than the era of Pompeii's destruction. Here's a specific example. One of the most famous casts of Pompeii depicted a woman with a characteristically swollen belly. For decades, she was called the pregnant victim of Vesuvius. Another tragic story. A would-be mother who failed to escape. An image that broke hearts. But when scientists finally looked inside the cast, everything turned out to be more prosaic. The swollen belly was the folds of dense clothing, not a sign of pregnancy. Restorers in past centuries viewed the casts through the lens of their own era and inadvertently infused them with their own perceptions of tragedy. Anthropologist David Caramelli from the University of Florence explained this directly. The use of casts for narrative purposes likely led restorers to alter poses and arrangements of bodies. We spent 1.5 centuries looking at Pompeii through the filter of the 19th and 20th centuries. We saw what we wanted to see. A mother with a child, a pregnant woman, sisters in embrace, beautiful stories born of our imagination rather than volcanic ash. Now, let's return to genetics. Remember the 3 ancient layers that formed the basis of Italian DNA? By the time of Rome's birth, this formula seemed complete. But when Rome turned into an empire, something unprecedented occurred. A study from Stanford University, published in Science in 2019, examined 48 genomes of imperial Roman inhabitants. The results shocked even the authors. 44 out of 48 individuals turned out to be genetically linked to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. From Greece, Syria, Lebanon. Only 2 showed a strong relation to Europe, and 2 more to North Africa. Geneticist Guido Barbugliani from the University of Ferrara found the perfect metaphor. Rome was like New York, a concentration of people of completely different origins brought together. The greatest empire of the ancient world turned out not to be a European fortress, but a genetic crossroads, where East and West mixed beyond recognition. Why did Pompeii become such a genetic kaleidoscope? The answer is simple: geography. Pompeii was not a quiet province. It was a river port, a strategic trade hub on the coast of Campania. Ships from Egypt, Syria, Greece, and North Africa regularly docked here. Historian Stephen Tuck from the University of Miami emphasizes that proximity to a major port, where ships constantly arrived from the eastern Mediterranean, explains the astonishing genetic diversity of the city. Ancient authors describe the population of Pompeii as a colorful mix of locals and immigrant groups of all origins. The city housed between 10 and 20,000 people. Merchants, artisans, slaves, freedmen, sailors, each brought not only goods and customs, but also their DNA. Pompeii was a miniature model of the entire empire, a melting pot at the foot of a volcano that would one day put an end to this grand experiment of mixing peoples. And now we come to the DNA analysis. In 2024, the same international team of scientists that we mentioned at the beginning published results in the journal Current Biology. Geneticists studied 14 plaster casts from Pompeii. They managed to extract ancient DNA from only 5, but even those 5 were enough to overturn the established picture. All 5 individuals turned out to be genetically male. None of the 5 were related to one another, even distantly up to the 3rd degree. They were completely unrelated people. But the most important findings lay deeper, in the structure of the genome itself. The individual with the highest coverage of DNA lacked long stretches of homozygosity. For a geneticist, this is a clear signal. Pompeii was not a closed, isolated settlement. It was a large, open, genetically diverse population, a city where people from various corners of the ancient world constantly mixed. Now let's broaden the genetic map of these 5 Pompeians. Their Y chromosomal haplogroups read like the route of ancient caravans. 2 carried the haplogroup J2A, 1 J2B. Both lines originated in Western Asia, in the lands of the Fertile Crescent, where humanity first sowed seeds. Another carried haplogroup E1B, a marker common in Western Asia and North Africa. And the last, T1A, a line from the Middle East. Not a single typical European haplogroup. Not one. But the geneticists went further and carried out a principal component analysis. The result was even more eloquent. On the genetic map, all 5 Pompeians shifted far from modern Italians. They did not even match with the Etruscans or the Iron Age population of Italy. Instead, they clustered close to populations of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Levant, and North African Jewish populations. The residents of Pompeii were genetically closer to Beirut and Damascus than to present-day Rome. But the most astonishing story awaited scientists not in the plaster casts, but in the house of the Craftsman. Back in 2022, geneticists from the University of Copenhagen studied the remains of a man aged 35 to 40 years, standing 164 centimeters tall. His Y chromosomal haplogroup turned out to be AM13, a subgroup of AV5880. This is one of the rarest lines on the planet. It is virtually absent in ancient Italy. Its main range is Eastern Africa, where it reaches 40%. At low frequencies, it is present in Turkey, Yemen, Egypt, Sardinia, and Cyprus. The mitochondrial haplogroup HV0A added another mystery. This line is not found in any other inhabitant of imperial Italy. But this man held not only a genetic secret. His spine was ravaged by tuberculosis. Pott's disease, affecting the lumbar vertebrae, causing unbearable pain with every movement. He was found lying on a dining couch beside an elderly woman suffering from arthritis. They simply could not run. Remember the famous 2 maidens in an embrace? The house of the cryptoporium, 1914. Archaeologists discovered two figures entwined in their last embrace. For nearly a century, the world called them sisters, mother and daughter, friends, even lovers. Their image became a symbol of a tragic feminine bond conquering death. They were printed on postcards, mentioned in films and novels, and poems were dedicated to them. A beautiful, poignant story. But the genetic analysis of 2024 shattered it to its foundations. Individual number 22 turned out to be genetically male. The mitochondrial haplogroups of both figures did not match, completely ruling out maternal kinship. No sisters. No mother and daughter. Alyssa Mitnick from the Max Planck Institute concluded that this discovery completely contradicts previous narratives and opens up entirely different interpretations of who these people might have been to each other. Who they really were, we may never know. Another finding added an important stroke to the genetic portrait of Pompeii. The house of Julius Polybius, one of the earliest studies of ancient DNA in the city. 12 people died under one roof, 8 men and 4 women. Mitochondrial analysis showed that 6 out of the 12 shared the same maternal DNA profile. They were related through the maternal line. 4 children, ages 3 to 14, were probably siblings or cousins. A young pregnant woman aged 16 to 18, possibly a big sister or an aunt. A man aged 25 to 30, perhaps an uncle through the mother. But the other 6 had no maternal relationship with them. They were strangers by blood. Friends, neighbors, slaves, clients. We do not know. A Roman house did not equal family in our understanding. Under one roof lived both blood relatives and completely unrelated people, united by circumstances, obligation, or chance. And now, a mystery that split the archaeological world in two. When exactly did Pompeii perish? The traditional date is August 24th, 79 AD. It is based on letters from Pliny the Younger to the historian Tacitus, written more than 25 years after the catastrophe. Pliny indicates the 9th day before the September calends, which corresponds to August 24th. But there's a problem. The original letter has not survived. Only medieval copies have reached us, and different scribes indicated different dates: August 24th, October 30th, November 1st, November 23rd. And in 2018, archaeologists discovered a charcoal inscription on the wall of one of the houses. The text read, "The 16th day before the November calends." That's October 17th. Charcoal is a fragile material. Logic suggests that the inscription was made shortly before the eruption. If this is the case, Pompeii perished not in the hot summer, but in the golden Mediterranean autumn. And the evidence in favor of autumn is indeed compelling. Most of the deceased wore thick, warm clothing, a strange choice for a hot Italian August. Pomegranates, figs, walnuts, and chestnuts, autumn fruits that do not ripen by the end of summer, were found in the houses. Fermentation containers for wine were sealed, which was usually done by October. And one of the coins bore the 15th imperial acclamation of Titus, which took place only in September 79 AD. But the traditional date also has its defenders. An experiment by the Archaeological Park showed that charcoal inscriptions can survive for over 10 months. Hermann's tortoise eggs were found. These tortoises lay their eggs from May to July, not in autumn. Autumn fruits could have been left by survivors returning to the city after the catastrophe. The park's director, Gabriel Zuchtriegel, stated that the date of August 24th has no documentary basis. The debate continues. And this is not a weakness of science, but its strength. But what happened to this Eastern genetic flow after the fall of the empire? History took a turn. The transfer of the capital to Constantinople, the schism of the empire into two halves, devastating epidemics, invasions of barbarian tribes, all surged into Italy wave after wave. The population of Rome, which at its peak numbered over 1 million, shrank to a pitiful 100,000. The great genetic crossroads began to empty. And then, the pendulum swung back. Data from the same Stanford study showed a clear genetic shift back toward the Western European component. The Holy Roman Empire brought a new influx of Central and Northern European DNA. Germanic, Frankish, Lombard genes filled the void left by the Eastern wave. By the medieval era, the inhabitants of Rome again genetically resembled typical Europeans. The Eastern Mediterranean flow seemed to have evaporated without a trace. But genetics knows no word without a trace. Those ancient markers did not disappear. They simply went deeper, hidden, serving as a quiet echo of a grand epoch. Think for a second. We are used to considering the Roman Empire as the cradle of European civilization. White marble, Latin inscriptions, stern senators in snowy togas. But DNA told a completely different story. The empire was not a fortress of one people, but a tumultuous flow of people from all over the Mediterranean. Syrians, Egyptians, Greeks, Levantines, and North Africans. They were not guests of Rome. They were Rome. Geneticist David Reich from Harvard put it succinctly. The past is a foreign country, and it is indeed strange, truly different. Sometimes what you think you see is not what is actually there. The DNA of Pompeii proved this literally. Nations, borders, racial categories, these are all conventions invented yesterday. And beneath the skin of each of us lie the traces of great journeys that began thousands of years ago and continue to this day. Now a question for you personally. Have you ever wondered what is written in your DNA? Perhaps you carry haplogroup J2A, that very one that belonged to the man with the golden bracelet in Pompeii. Or the rare AM13, like that man from the house of Craftsman, who could not escape from Vesuvius. Or maybe a trace of an Anatolian farmer or a Bronze Age steppe nomad sleeps in your genes. We are all living palimpsests, parchments on which thousands of generations have written their stories over those that came before. And each of these stories is part of one great journey that lasts tens of thousands of years. Have you taken a DNA test? Do you know your haplogroups? Write in the comments what results you received. It's incredibly interesting. If this video revealed something new to you, if it made you reconsider the past, give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episode. Because the history recorded in our genes is just beginning.